Hi everyone, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Nick.
And you're listening to It Takes Two, the podcast where two people take two movies with the same plot or premise and watch and discuss them.
And in this episode, we watched two movies about journalism and pretty heavy stuff. So a little bit of a warning here. We watched She Said and Spotlight.
Yeah, so these, while the topics they discuss are not necessarily exactly the same,
the premise definitely is.
Yeah, so they're two films about, they're both based on true stories. They're about investigative journalists uncovering story of systemic sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So actually...
yeah, they are the same.
They're very much the same.
The subject matter, obviously, of the abuse is different. Also, the time that these investigations happened. Spotlight is set pre 9/11 and then post 9/11, so 2001.
Into 2002.
And the Me Too movement was really recent. What was that, 18?
2017 is when the New York Times published that article. So the Me Too movement actually started in 2006 and then kind of lost traction, and this New York Times article really kickstarted it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as you have pointed out before we started recording, this is probably the most serious set of films that we're discussing, because A, they're both based on true stories, and B, they both tackle pretty heavy topics.
Yeah, pretty horrendous behaviour. And like I said to you, not obviously while we were recording, but I think the last time we covered such a heavy topic would have been our Unpregnant episode, which was two movies about young women having to cross state lines in the States to get abortions, one of them being much more gritty and real, where the other one was a comedy. And obviously neither of these movies are comedies, so personally I'm going to be very respectful to the victims of these crimes that were committed, and just discuss, I guess, how we both feel and sort of the way the movies went, because there's no, unlike most episodes where one's clearly way better than the other, both of these movies are really well made, and I think huge kudos to the filmmakers who spent the time being respectful as possible to bring these to this big screen.
And that brings us to one of the first points I wanted to talk about, which was accuracy.
Yeah.
She Said is based on a book that was written by Jodi Kantor and the other reporter whose name I've forgotten. But the two who are the main characters, the two women who broke the story, essentially.
Yeah.
I haven't written her name down. Hang on. I'm so sorry to the second reporter. I do have it here somewhere. Megan Twohey, yeah. So Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor, the two New York Times journalists who broke the story, wrote a book about the whole experience. She Said is based on that book and apparently is pretty much 100% accurate. The filmmakers, I mean, I'm sure they use some amount of creative license to, make it look nice and things like that, but in terms of the facts, they decided they wanted the story to speak for itself.
Yeah.
Which is a big risk to take, I think, almost as a filmmaker, but it's pretty compelling story to begin with. Spotlight, someone did the math, and Spotlight is 76.2% accurate, apparently.
Okay.
So some of the stuff, it does mention at the end that they ended up writing a ton of articles over the course of a year about it.
Yeah.
So some of the interviews that they put in the film actually didn't happen until after the events of the film.
Yeah.
So they're real interactions and real stories, but they've moved the chronological order.
Yeah.
The priest who openly admitted to molesting children, the reporter who goes to him in the movie is not. She's the one who wrote the actual story, but it was based on notes by a different reporter who interviewed him. So it's things like that. So they're not. And when one of the reporters discovers that the priest treatment center is around the corner from his house, it wasn't actually the treatment center that was around the corner from his house. It was the first priest that they had been investigating. They've discovered that's where he'd been moved to.
Oh, okay.
So rather than sticking a picture of the house on his fridge and telling the kids not to go near it, he took a photo of the guy.
Oh, right.
But the filmmakers thought that seemed unrealistic, even though it's what really happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the only other thing that was inaccurate about it was, and it's accurate but inaccurate, when the lawyer McLeish tells him that he sent them the article, or he sent them the list of names.
Yeah.
10 years ago, or in 93, or whenever it was, so
Yeah.
8 years ago. He didn't tell them that, and they didn't discover it in their investigation. The filmmakers discovered it when they were trying to write the screenplay.
Oh, Jesus.
They interviewed the lawyer, and he said I'd actually sent them to them.
Yeah.
And when they went and spoke to Robinson, the guy that Michael Keaton plays, he said, I was the editor of Metro at the time, and it's possible I just missed the story.
Wasn't it the Globe? Wasn't it Boston Globe?
Yeah. They buried the story in Metro.
Okay.
Is what it got put into, and he was the editor of that department, or is that a separate?
I'm not sure.
Subsidiary.
I'm not sure how papers work anymore.
Yeah.
It's interesting because as a male, I was very uncomfortable because we went to the movie theatre to see She Said, because at the time of this recording, it just came out. So we've given you guys a couple of months to.
Yeah, it's very, very fresh in our heads, but we are pre-recording in November.
Yeah, spoilers for how movie magic works behind the scenes.
I think it's important to note that we're pre-recording because we're probably not going to be able to give accurate box office.
Yeah, true.
Whereas in January it'll be different.
Yeah, exactly. I was very uncomfortable.
I was very uncomfortable.
I was more uncomfortable than you. No.
That's what Harvey Weinstein would say about it.
Yeah. It's really, I have no dog in the fight of Spotlight. It didn't affect me. I'm not Catholic. I wasn't, let's put it the nicest way possible. I'm agnostic, but I've never been really interested in organized religion. I did have, I wouldn't say a crisis of faith, but I sort of had a crisis of confusion, if that makes more sense. Probably doesn't. I'll put it into context. A few years back, some random guy on the street handed me a book. I don't know, that sounds really weird. But he was literally just selling books on the side of the street. And I was like, oh, whatever, I've got change in my pocket. So I gave the guy, because it was just like $5 or whatever you feel like. And I had a $10 note, and I was just like, oh, whatever. So it was a religious book in relation to Eastern religious teachings. Mm-hmm. So I read it. And I read it on the bus, and it wasn't like I couldn't put it down. Like when I first read Game of Thrones, it was just a little sort of like, this is interesting. And so I read through it, and I have read the Bible, King James Bible, years and years ago. What's that old saying? Believing in the Bible makes you a Christian. Reading the Bible makes you an atheist. Going through, I've read a English translation of the Quran. I've read, I can't remember what is the book of Judaism? I can't remember.
The Torah?
Torah, yeah. I've read an English translation of that, or what has been translated into English from that, because I know their language is very important to their people, so it's not like, you just have an English copy of it. And the thing that I found is most religions are the same. Mm-hmm. That's true. You talk to ex-Catholics who are very devout young children, and they sort of grew up and were just like, blah, blah, blah. The best understanding of how religion works is the same way ad campaigns work, which is just flooding your understanding with symbolism and other forms of I wouldn't say control, just limiting your choices, if that makes sense. And I know you being Irish, there's some interesting kind of religious issues ongoing between people who are Catholic and people who aren't. And, it just really touches on a really sad subject for a bunch of people because it was a joke. Both of these things were a joke for years, for decades. Not the actual subject matter, but just the amount of jokes, as we were discussing after we watched the movie when we were getting, we had food afterwards, eh?
After she said, we
went to Auntie Mina's.
Shout out to Auntie Mina's, best restaurant in Wellington.
Best vegan restaurant in Wellington.
Best restaurant in Wellington.
Okay. What did I say when we were walking down this? There was a red carpet interview with Courtney Love, who said, and the reporter said, any advice for young women coming to Hollywood to make their thing? And she said, if you ever get invited to like a business meeting or Harvey Weinstein's hotel, don't go.
Yep.
And
that was early 90s.
Yeah, it was early 90s. There was thousands of jokes that men throw across of, Catholic priests and young boys, and it's even the first person that came to mind was, which is related to both of these things, Louis C.K. when he had a TV show, had a joke about visiting the Catholic Church and why they have to molest young boys and like all this shit, and it's just like, right, not the right person, because obviously he got caught up in the Me Too movement from his weird shit that he was up to.
Yeah, I don't know if you can say he got caught up in it. Because...
Well, he was a perpetrator of abuse.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, just to change the language away from like, he got whisked up in this thing that happened. It's like, no, he abused people.
Yeah. It's interesting because you sort of have to now look at everything that's happened in the past in regards to these two subjects and go, why did we let this happen? But then these movies explain how these people, these disgusting human beings got away with it for so long. And it wasn't just the abuser who was perpetrating this. It's lawyers and not being able to say anything because of the way the law works and how non-disclosure agreements work and how settlements work. And
and in both cases, you had the people actually committing the abuse putting pressure on the victim to not talk about it, and then you had people around them putting pressure on the victim to not talk about it, and then you had people giving incentives to not talk about it, and then you had the lawyers giving them settlements and keeping the cases shut. And in both cases, you have in both films and in both real life situations, you have the reporters trying to investigate and finding no paper trail because everything was settled out of court.
Yeah.
And that's the big reason why I think these films are similar and these situations are similar is because they're not just about individual instances of abuse. They're about systems that supported abusers and helped and allowed these things to happen.
Yeah.
And to keep happening. And I know you said you didn't have a dog in the fight with Spotlight, but I saw Spotlight in cinema when it came out, and I saw it with my mom.
Yeah.
And you will have noticed when it gets to the end there and it says, here's all the places these things have happened. There's a lot of Irish towns and counties on there.
Yeah. There's a lot of states in America, a lot of towns in America. New Zealand is in there as well.
Yeah, Christchurch was in there.
Yeah.
But my mom burst into tears.
Mm.
And like she knows people who have been victims of that abuse. You know.
Yeah, it's not an easy subject to come across, and I think it's really good on these people to be fighting for it. The people in, because you know, obviously, yeah, especially in She Said, like after the victims came forward and the people published the story, they suffered more abuse after that as well.
Yeah. And you see, it just shows you snippets of because Megan Twohey, who's one of the two reporters, also reported on abuse allegations against Trump. And so at the beginning of the film, you see it starting at that point, because it starts off in 2016 before the election.
Yeah.
And you get to see her getting threats of rape and violence on the phone. So they went into this knowing that that's what they would get.
Yeah.
So there's a real dedication there. I think in Spotlight you see a little bit of that as well, that they're preparing to have their phones ringing and they know that the church are going to be upset about it, and that the town, you know, Boston is full of Catholics and people are not going to be happy. But in Spotlight, what you see at the end is that they are getting a lot of phone calls, but they're mostly
from victims.
Other victims who want to come forward. And they don't show that in She Said, but we know that, you know, the Me Too movement really kicked off again after that. So again, you know, these articles caused other victims to go, hey, that happened to me too.
Yeah.
And, you know, as people, to me, sorry, I didn't mean to say to me too.
Yeah.
But, you know, they start to say like, oh, this isn't isolated. It's not just me. Or, you know, these people have spoken out, I can speak out too. I think both films really highlight the important role that media can have in things like that.
And it's interesting too, because in this day and age, where we have phones and have instant access to pretty much all of human knowledge at any point in time, we get flooded with a lot of, like, I hate to use the term because it has been coined by a accused abuser, but fake news is a huge issue. And
yeah, just false information.
Yeah, it's false information.
Yeah, misinformation.
And because the way that media works is, you know, you have, and it's even New Zealand politics is a big one that always makes me laugh, because you have some very popular, which I won't name because I don't deserve it, you have very popular, you know, news websites that most people look at every day, especially if you work in an office job and you're trying to hide doing work. And you spend time on these websites that aren't, you know, their articles aren't locked behind paywalls, which I think's getting absolutely disgusting, because you've got, unless you've got ad block running, you've got 10,000 ads popped up in your face before you can even look at the article, and then it asks you to pay money to read it or subscribe. And I don't mean like as in put your email in, it's like put your credit card information in. Even the images that they use of people, and I will bring it back to stuff that was happening a few years back, where I always remember looking at articles, and it was always, you know, there would be our current Prime Minister had a very nice candid photo of herself, you know, looking very nice and smiling. And then you had the leader of the opposition, and one of his eyes would be closed and his mouth would be open. You're like, I wonder which side these people are on. And that's the thing. It's everyone has a bias. Everyone has an agenda. And it's, you know, that's the big issue that faces us, because you don't have the time. Most people sitting at home or listening to this don't have the time to do their own research. So when you have an article from what you think is a trusted news source being like, this person did this person said that, this person has been accused of this, and you're like, cool, do I now have to spend the next 3 hours looking up the person who wrote this article, the people, you know, like, we don't have time. We don't have time because it is a constant flow, and you're like, oh, well, okay, that article's over onto the next one.
But I think that's why in both of these cases, the reporters really put in the time to it, and really,
that's really important.
Yeah,
because if you want the truth, you have to actually go and get it and not let it get away.
Yeah, and they both films really highlight the fact that they knew that they needed to have named sources, multiple sources. They needed to have things confirmed because they knew that people reading it would dismiss it if they didn't have all the hard evidence.
Yeah.
And they knew, you know, that it would be easier to be quashed in a legal sense as well if they didn't have really solid evidence behind it. So you get to see, you know, and She Said, I think it's done very emotionally, that, like, Jodi Kantor, so it's like, you know, she when they finally get someone to say, yes, I'll be a named source, she literally just breaks down crying on the phone because they've been trying so hard for months to get anyone
to come forward. Yeah.
Because as they say, you know, none of these people want to be the only person to do it. And it's, you know, and they're so invested in the story and so invested in the fact that, you know, this could help other people avoid being in this situation. This could raise awareness for how this abuse is happening and how this abuse is being perpetuated. And, you know, I think they really put their whole lives into investigating it for the time that they were doing it.
Yeah.
So it's I think it really highlights how important it was to them to get those sources. And can I just say shout out to Ashley Judd for not only being their named source on the article, but also playing herself in the movie.
Yeah. Because there were many celebrities mentioned, and they were all voice acted. Including obviously Harvey Weinstein, and like he had a body double who looked very, very similar to Harvey Weinstein, and Trump had a voice actor play. Yeah,
the guy who did the Trump impersonation is famous for doing Trump impersonations. Apparently was hired by Saturday Night Live based on his YouTube videos where he did Trump impersonations, so it's like his whole thing nowadays, I think.
But Rose McGowan plays a big part of the beginning of the movie, and we sat in to watch the credits to see if she actually played herself when she didn't. Yeah.
But I also understand not wanting to relive it. And speaking of reliving it, there's one of the victims that they talk to in Spotlight is he's not one of the actual he's not playing himself in it, but he is an actual victim of abuse from a priest. So the guy who plays... So Jimmy LeBlanc is the actor's name. He plays Patrick McSorley. So the first guy that Mark Ruffalo's character interviews with Stanley Tucci in the room. Sorry, probably should have used character, like the reporters' names rather than Mark Ruffalo and Stanley Tucci.
Just a pause on the moment, like, they really didn't pull the punches when it came to casting for these movies either. Like, I'm glad all these people, like... Well, I wouldn't say risk their careers, but like this isn't one of those movies that you're going to sign on for a $1 million paycheck.
Yeah, Michael Keaton had so he did this right after Birdman.
Yeah.
And he had planned to take a break from acting after Birdman apparently, and then he read the script for Spotlight and said, "I'll do it. I'll do that." And then it became the second Michael Keaton film in a row to win a Best Picture Oscar. So it was the right choice.
Yeah. So, sorry, continue on what you were saying.
Oh yeah, so Jimmy LeBlanc, he was an actual survivor of the clerical abuse. I just have a note about him because I thought it was kind of funny. Not that this is funny subject matter, but when they brought him in for rehearsals, he was brought into a room with Mark Ruffalo, Michael Keaton, and Stanley Tucci. And the director, Tom McCarthy, was afraid that, or he's really concerned about revisiting his abuse in his past and his trauma. So when after they finished the rehearsals, when he was leaving, he asked him, "Oh, were you freaked out, or were you okay with what happened?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course I'm freaked out. That was the Hulk and Batman and the guy from The Devil Wears Prada." And it's like, oh, okay, that's what you were focused on.
Yeah.
It's like, so the director's worrying about, reliving his trauma, but he's going in and going, holy shit, it's the Hulk and Batman.
Yeah.
And Stanley Tucci. So that was a little bit of a lighthearted piece of trivia. But again, they used, they had at least one actor who was an actual victim of the same kind of abuse in Spotlight. Which I think, the fact that they had Ashley Judd playing Ashley Judd and they had that shows more, dedication to showing the realness of it to some extent. Because you've got people in there who actually experienced this.
It's the numbers are the scary part because they sort of bring a lead up to it in both these movies, which would have been obviously how it would have come to fruition in real life, where they had, like what is the estimated number, and it's like, the guy that they spoke to on the phone was like 6%. And it's like there's 1,500 priests in Boston alone. Like you were saying 6%, so that's 80.
90 priests in Boston alone.
Yeah, and they got to 87 priests that they could
find names for.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then in the same time She Said, it was 82 victims of Harvey Weinstein came forward in the end.
Was it in the end? Yeah. Because in terms of settlements, it was 8 to 12, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was thrown out. And I was expecting, probably because I'd seen Spotlight first, years ago, but I don't know. And also because I knew so many people had come forward, I was expecting it to be a much higher number. But in both cases, they start out with one.
Yeah.
So in Spotlight, it's one priest, and they've got a few allegations against the one priest. And in She Said, it's just Rose McGowan accusing Harvey Weinstein, and that's it. But then as they investigate in both cases, they find, people are unwilling to talk to them about it, and then they find that, there's so many people who already know about it.
Yeah.
I actually took down a quote from Spotlight because it was what Rachel McAdams said at one point. She just turned around and said, it's like everybody already knows the story.
Yeah.
And then I think Michael Keaton was like, except us.
Yeah.
And it feels very much the same in She Said, even though, again, in both cases, it turns out that people had reported these things to that same newspaper years beforehand. So I think it was in 2004 for the New York Times with Harvey Weinstein, and in 1993 for the Spotlight crew in the Boston Globe in the other one. It had been, fallen by the wayside and not actually investigated. So when they're investigating, you get people unwilling to talk because they've been silenced, people unwilling to talk because they're afraid of Harvey Weinstein and his power, or the church and their power. People unwilling to talk because they've already tried to talk and it went nowhere. And it's very, very difficult. And then people willing to talk because they don't want to relive it.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Me Too movement because the axe swung both ways, for the better in the long term. There were some people who fell through the cracks, but the fact that speaking out against someone who had abused you then would have cost you your career, which happened to a lot of people.
Yep.
And now it's swinging back the other way a little bit, where accusing people will destroy their career without any evidence performed. And it's interesting because I'm not saying it's literally, we have the case that comes to mind is Kevin Spacey. And unfortunately, I used to really enjoy him as an actor.
Yeah, Kevin Spacey was the first case of abuse that came to light that I thought, oh, I'm disappointed. I thought I thought better of.
Yeah.
Because I also enjoyed him as an actor.
And it's his case. I won't go into it now, but that's really interesting. There is a little bit of a rabbit hole which I won't mention.
I think you've mentioned it in a different episode before.
Did I mention it in the episode?
I just remember putting it in the show notes before, or something about your Kevin Spacey rabbit holes and the British Crown. And all
that. So I will mention it because you've continued it. I was going to leave it there, but the issue with Kevin Spacey's, the accusations against Kevin Spacey is all of his accusers are dead.
Yeah, it's frightening.
And it's like,
Yeah, what are the odds?
Yeah, what are the odds that all these young, but there is a ongoing pattern where people, especially young men who were abused at a young age, being more susceptible to falling to the disease that is wrecking most nations, which is suicide. And you sort of go, oh, were they killed? Were they murdered? How do we know? We won't get into my, and I know I know that's a dangerous word. I've suspected that like a lot of people, and this is going to sound real tinfoil hat for the people at home, but or at work or wherever you are right now.
In your car,
on public transport. I believe Princess Diana was pregnant.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that's where you were going to go with that. But
Okay,
all right.
yeah. Well, I believe she was pregnant to a Saudi prince's baby, and I think some people maybe did something to stop something dangerous from happening from there, that would have shaken down the infrastructure that they've built. And it's the same with the meme that I saw the other day, how one of the prince's sons is an American citizen and therefore could eventually
become president.
And it's a long game by George II to retake America. I personally think we are beyond monarchies.
But that's another. I mean, if
well, Prince Philip.
No, I'm saying that's another big powerful system like the church.
Yeah.
If there is
Andrew.
Prince Andrew is
Prince
the one
Andrew, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Philip is king. Right? King now?
I thought it was Charles.
Charles? King Charles? Is it?
I don't know what's happening.
I don't remember the names of the royal family.
We were in the Republic of Ireland when it happened, goddammit.
I was gonna say I'm a Republican. That means something different to a lot of people out there. I don't know who's the king.
We happen to be in the UK.
This is gonna piss off a lot of people. Yeah, King Charles. Who's Philip? Philip is the father.
Yeah.
Isn't he dead?
I assume so.
Well, then why were you talking about him?
No, Prince Andrew was the one who
is an abuser.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know this. Okay. That's confused me. Anyway, we've gone on a tangent now.
Do you want to go on another tangent?
What were you going to say? You look really ready to talk about something.
I was going to say, did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself?
Oh my gosh. Okay, that has nothing to do with these films. Can we get back to the movies?
Does it? Does it not have anything to do with these films? Powerful people using the infrastructure to abuse people.
True.
Yeah. You don't have a oil painting of ex-President Bill Clinton in a dress in your main foyer and not have some shit about some people. Did you not know that?
I just... Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I've gone on a tangent, folks.
Yeah,
let's back to the movie. Ad breaks over. Movie time. You were gonna take over from there. Sorry.
Oh, am I? Sorry. Yeah. Was that my cue?
That's it was
my
your cue. Yeah,
I get a cue now.
Exit stage left. No.
I don't know. In terms of filmmaking, they're both just really good movies.
Yeah, they're really well made. But I think that was sort of like, it had to be done that way. Yeah,
I don't know if we get more. I think the interesting thing to me about She Said over Spotlight, even though I think instant impact wise, Spotlight had more of an impact on me, but I grew up in Ireland, as we've mentioned, and we can go into that later if we want, but the interesting thing to me about She Said was how they tied it to the personal lives of the reporters.
Yeah.
Because they are two women and they are experiencing abuse, not the systemic sexual abuse that they're investigating, but they're getting threats. They're up against these systems to some extent, and you get a hint that there is a background of abuse at least with Megan Twohey. And I haven't investigated her past, and I want to give her respect. I'm not going to do that, but they do mention it Carey Mulligan playing her in the film mentions it in the sense that she's talking about we see her suffering from postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And Zoe Kazan's character also references that she experienced that with her first child. And you get Megan Twohey saying, do you think that this is a result of the abuse and the trauma we go through in our lives up to this point? That, the reason women experience postpartum depression and similar, illnesses is that they have built up and pent up this trauma over years and years, and then it has to go somewhere.
I thought it was a medical issue.
What do you mean?
I thought it was related to hormone imbalances.
What? The postpartum depression?
Yeah.
I don't know the full science of it, but
yeah. That was my understanding at the time. So
right.
Yeah.
But you remember her saying that?
Yeah, I remember her saying in the movie. To my knowledge, at right this point in time, it was because your body goes through so much trauma when you give birth.
Mm-hmm.
That your hormones just go, because they've been obviously feeding another life all this time, that they just go all completely out of control.
But I think that was her point, that it's, that is a result of trauma through birth. But she's saying that, is it because we've had so much trauma already to this point that that's just the tipping point?
Yeah.
So it is, just even the fact that she says it is indicating that she has experienced that kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And... that's, I think they're giving us a little bit of an insight into maybe why this was so important to them, that they also have been victims of the system to some extent, not necessarily the Hollywood system, but, I know in the Me Too movement, there were people in the New York Times who were called out and, for being abusers as well, so it was happening in that organization. It just wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I think the statistics on it are pretty sad. I can look it up, so I'm sure it'll come up very quickly, but I haven't got it yet. But the just the number of women who are victims of sexual harassment in their lives.
Yeah.
I think it's something like 25% of women or something. And it's so everyone knows women who have been victims of abuse, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was victimized years ago,
mm-hmm.
and I'm not trying to be like, well, I'm just sharing my story because I'm completely comfortable with it. I was at a bar, and a much older woman than I was at the time came over to me and groped me. And there's a difference between power, and I'm not talking about like in the workplace, obviously, if it's your manager or someone that's higher up, and then there's a power issue. There's going to be an issue if you react the same way I did. And my response to this lady touching me inappropriately was I literally turned to her and said, "Do you want to leave in a taxi or an ambulance?"
Mm.
And she was like, "Oh, you're a feisty one." And my response was to get up in her face and said, "Get the fuck out."
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of it. And I feel, as a man, I have the ability to do that. Like, I would have been able to back up my actions. As a woman, and you're in a place, like, women get victimized in any going out in public.
Yeah.
And there's a huge power difference between the reaction you can actually take as a man being abused versus a woman being abused, because the fear also comes through, because there is no way that woman would have been able to do anything to me without me being able to physically stop it. But if you're a woman in that situation, could you? Like, would anybody actually help you? Like, it's a really, like, it's a really fucked up situation.
Yeah, I mean, like, thankfully I haven't been in very serious situations like that, but I did have one situation where I was in a place. I'm going to not go into much detail about it, but my mom was waiting outside in the car for me, so she might remember this. And a person, a man, stood between me and the door, closed the door, and tried to... I mean, I think he just tried to ask me on a date. I was 18, I think. Yeah. This guy was, at least in his mid to late 20s. And you just have that moment where you think, if I say no, what is he going to do?
Yeah.
And, like, in seconds trying to calculate, if I scream, will my mom hear me outside in the car? Like, what can I do here? And thankfully then he accepted it and let me go. But, like, it's very intimidating, even that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
you could be in public in the daytime and you still have that moment of, oh shit, like...
Yeah.
It's, we live in a very weird situation in this day and age because, years ago, I feel, and I'm not saying the olden days were better because obviously we've just, from the evidence of this, it's like without the internet and without, people being able to access information, it was a lot worse. I'm saying people were, in smaller communities, people helped other people, but like when they teach, I can't remember what it's called, and I don't want to say the R word. When they teach women how to avoid being victims, they tell you never to scream the word help. They tell you to scream the word fire. Because people will come and look at it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a human issue.
Yeah, I think it comes into bystander effect.
Yeah.
As well, that like someone else will help.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like a human issue. Because you just did your first aid training recently, eh? Did they show the video? Sorry, we're going on a tangent here, folks. But context for the mentality. Did they show the video? Of the netball game?
No.
Oh, okay. A little bit of context for you at home, or wherever you are. What I'm referring to is there was a case years and years ago of a young woman who was playing netball at school and was horribly injured during the game. And there were 60, 90 people there, and not a single person rang an ambulance. Because everyone automatically thinks, oh, someone else will do it.
Yeah. That's why, they tell you...
In first aid training, you literally make eye contact.
You point at a person, if you know their name, you call them by their name, and you say,
ring an ambulance and get back to me. Yeah.
Yeah, because then... and also get back to me, because then you know that they've done it.
Yeah.
And that way, that person is like, oh, I am personally responsible for this, rather than letting someone else. But it's like, because I think the bystander effect was coined after a case that I can't remember where it was, but it was a woman who had been assaulted, and she ran into the courtyard of an apartment block. So it was like, multi-story apartments all around her, so in every direction. And she was screaming, and people just assumed someone else would help, and they all watched from their windows, and then the people who attacked her were able to come up and kill her.
Yeah.
Because no one called anyone.
Yeah.
Because they all assumed someone else would do it. And it's really scary, that kind of stuff.
I think, personally, both of us have a mentality where we would be that one person that would go help. I know for a fact, because I won't go into it, obviously, for our privacy's sake, but I have witnessed you contact the authorities for something, and I'm the kind of person who would, if I saw that in public, do something.
Yep.
I'm not a bystander.
Yeah, I think we're also very aware, both from our personal experiences and our work experiences, of the bystander effect.
Like what happened when we were out with your brother.
Oh yeah. Where we go into work mode.
Yeah.
But we both are very aware of the bystander effect and of the fact that maybe no one else will help.
Yeah.
So you gotta stop and do it. Like, I mean, I apply that to things like I reported a leak from a drain on council property because I literally I walked past it and then I thought, if that hasn't been reported, why shouldn't I should report it just in case, because the easy assumption is someone else has already called, someone else has already let them know, but you just think that's gonna cause problems. If there's a whole lot of water leaking, if there's a burst water mains or whatever it was that was going on, I was like, well, I need to talk about this. And yeah, I don't know. And I mean, I think I've had that mentality for a long time, and I experienced, I don't know if maybe call it harassment, bullying at the very least, from, I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, from a person who worked at where I went to third level education. So I was a student and a teenager, and they were a faculty member. And when I initially complained, they said to me, no one has ever complained about that person before.
Yeah.
And I knew that people had tried to. Yeah. So I just thought, well, even if it costs me my degree, my goal this year is to make sure no one, or they can never again say no one has complained. Yeah. So I made that my mission. And that person, I think they still work there, but were demoted, which is better than nothing, I guess. Yeah. But there's some of the power was removed because, again, it was to do with a power dynamic being used and being exploited, and obviously a system backing them. Because the system was trying to get me to go away with my complaint and say, and had obviously dismissed others. And it's to a much smaller scale than what's going on in Spotlight or She Said, but it's amazing how much it happens everywhere, just everywhere. Yeah,
it's like we talk about these big things, these big moments. Obviously the discovery of the Catholic Church just moving priests rather than actually dealing with the systemic problem, and then covering it up.
Yeah, and it's the cover up in both cases.
And then Harvey Weinstein having 80 plus victims, which is like shocking because obviously it was just like his hobby
and spanning decades.
Yeah, and spanning decades. And then you get people like who was the other big one at the time? Oh, Bill Cosby. America's uncle. Like, America's never did dirty comedy. Like, no one saw that shit coming.
Yeah. And there's a lot
But then he had used his power to destroy people's careers so no one would believe what they said.
Exactly. And that's it. It's this systemic abuse. And it's this, holding so much power that you control a narrative, essentially. And very much in both Spotlight and She Said, it's the silencing of victims. Yeah. Like, complete silencing, giving them... And it's, they really show it in She Said that... they're playing it towards the victims as like, money means that the settlement means that he is agreeing that he's done something wrong, but then they're saying, oh no, well, he settled just to make it go away, but he didn't actually do anything. And there's no evidence because it never went through court. And they're just trying to get them to shut up and never be able to talk about it without legal repercussions. Which is why it's really important, and She Said, and in real life, that one of the victims hadn't settled and hadn't signed anything. But unfortunately, she was dealing with her own issues at the time because she'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer. Yeah. Which is factual. It's true to life. That it did coincide with that diagnosis for her, unfortunately. But then she did, in the end, come forward and say, yeah, you can use my anything I've said to you, you can use. Yeah. I think it's and you find in both cases as well, there were victims who didn't want to come out and say it because they had children and they didn't want their children to think less of them.
Yeah.
But then you also think, well,
aren't you just like literally setting your child up for failure? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like is it not, and you have to weigh that up, I guess. Is it more important that your child doesn't know this happened, or is it more important that your child grows up into a world where they're not going to experience the same abuse? Yeah. And I think especially in Spotlight, because the children are the people who are the victims. And part of that was because by the time that they feel confident enough to actually, speak out about it, the statute of limitations is gone. They can't do anything. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of cases that are interesting when you start delving deep in. Like, I remember Netflix releasing that Leaving Neverland documentary, which was about Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
And, like, a lot of people shat on it massively, and for legitimate reasons. It wasn't just like we're supporting Michael no matter what he did, but like one of the people who was in, I won't even mention their name, one of the people who was in the show talking about how he was abused by Michael was also the key witness in his case, who said on the stand, he did not molest me, which threw the entire case out from the prosecution's point of view. Mm-hmm. So, what is he committing perjury now, or was he lying on and you had listened to some of the other testimonies of people who were children and spent time with Michael Jackson, and they're like, well, what did Corey Feldman said? Because he's the one that didn't commit suicide, right? One of them committed... Corey Haim?
Yeah, Corey Haim is the one.
Yeah, Corey Haim committed suicide because of the abuse he suffered as a child in Hollywood.
Yeah. There's a lot of that by a lot of child abuse, abusive child actors in Hollywood. Which is...
and he said, Corey Feldman said on... I can't remember... I don't think it was like one of the late night shows, but he did say in an interview, out of all the people... he was the only person who didn't molest me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, you look at the damage it's done to these child stars, and it male, female, it doesn't matter. Like, people get abused left, right, and centre because, it's the same with bad policing. Like, people get into industry so they have power over other people just so they can abuse it.
And you get it with education sometimes as well. You get people who become teachers so they can abuse it. Priest is a big one.
Yeah.
In fairness, I think in statistic-wise, I know it's going to sound horrible, but apparently the 6% of priests that committed abuse stands up in just regular population. 6% of normal population are pedophiles.
Jesus Christ.
Or have abused children. So it is, apparently that is the actual statistic average in just general populace. So it's not that it's an outlier amongst priests, but what was an outlier was the cover-up.
Yeah.
And the fact that they let them keep doing it. What you're saying about child actors there, they highlight in Spotlight that the priests didn't necessarily prefer, because I know people talk a lot about priests molesting young boys.
Yeah.
It happened to young girls as well, and it wasn't that they preferred boys over girls, but that boys were more likely to feel shame and less likely to tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you get more male child actors that were targeted than female. Which is really upsetting. It was really upsetting. And it just proves that it's targeted and that it's, they think about it and they pick victims that they don't think are going to tell anyone. Ugh.
Yeah. Not a pleasant subject to talk about at any point of view.
No. They're both very tough subjects. I mean, they're both to some extent the same subject. I don't want to say I have more of a dog in the fight in both than you do, but it's probably somewhat accurate.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know if you get to benefit from the patriarchy, but but I certainly am more likely to be negatively affected by patriarchal systems, probably.
Yeah.
And then obviously, Ireland has a very, very complicated history with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, which I was going to mention something, but I feel tasteless if I did, so I'll move on.
What was it?
That covenant for the young woman without,
the mother and baby homes.
Yeah.
So Ireland, I think a lot of Irish people are very disenfranchised with the Catholic Church, with the institution, the organization. I think a lot of Irish people still, the vast majority of Irish people probably still are born and raised Catholic. I'm baptized, did my first Holy Communion, first confession, confirmation, all that stuff. I went to Catholic schools. I was in church choirs, etc., etc. I think a lot of people are not, they have very complicated relationships with the church and with the institution, because Ireland has not a great record for the separation of church and state, first of all. We've only recently, in the past 10 years, had referendums to, amend or to repeal the Eighth Amendment, which put the life of a unborn child higher than the life of a mother. And caused a lot of harm to a lot of people, because it meant that women couldn't get any kind of medical care while pregnant. Essentially, basically. It was a really horrible situation, and it was very much backed by the church. And then also, 2015, we had our referendum for same-sex marriage to be allowed. And in both of those referendums, there was like a really, the polls showed things as like 50-50 a lot of the time, or around that. And then there was a really strong silent vote, people who weren't speaking to anyone about it, or but had been victims of, I think especially the Eighth Amendment, when there was a lot of women, a lot of older women who had been through the system, of mistreatment as a result of the Eighth Amendment, who came forward and voted. And like you said, the mother and baby homes were, it came out, in recent years that, I don't even know the number, but like thousands upon thousands of bodies of women and children were found, essentially dumped in underground, I don't know, were they sewers or, but like they were all just mass graves, essentially, from these homes run by Catholic Church, where they had been, bringing unwed mothers or unwed pregnant women to, I don't know, rehabilitate them into the Catholic Church or whatever, and then they just are gone.
Yeah.
And that was like the child abuse that went on. It was uncovered, I think, largely in part because of children who had survived those homes.
Yeah.
Who then were going looking for their mothers and trying to figure out what had happened to them, and then you discover there's this horrible system in place. And again, women and children were the primary victims.
Yeah.
So Ireland, and a lot of, like I said, a lot of Irish places were included in the where those priests were. A lot of people suffered from abuse from the Catholic Church in Ireland over the past, I don't know, at least 6 decades.
Yeah. And it's the thing is that despite this all being true, you want to know how powerful the Catholic Church is, folks? I can suggest 2 pages you look up on Wikipedia. World population density and world wealth density. Because the Catholic Church is on the Vatican, which is the home of the Catholic Church, is on the bottom of one of those and near the top on the other one. They have like 80 people and more money than New Zealand has. and they don't pay taxes. What was a scary statistic the other day? Someone complained about how much one of the rovers we just the human race. I'm not saying we as in I'm an American, but I'm saying we as a human race placed on Mars, and people were like, "Oh, well, you could have used all that money to feed homeless people or do something with education." And it's like, if we tax the church, we could afford one of those rovers each week or each 2 weeks. Like, that's how much money they get.
Yep.
And don't have to pay taxes on. It's a scary system that has been with us since the age before Enlightenment, and probably, as like I said, as an agnostic, something we probably have to get rid of going forward.
I just want to interject here to say I no problem at all with people having Catholic beliefs.
Yeah, I don't have no problem with people having religious beliefs.
Yeah, with any kind of religious beliefs. It's the system of the institution that is the problem.
Yeah.
And I find that, organized religion can cause a lot of problems and has been causing a lot of problems for a very long time. And it doesn't mean that religion is the problem or belief is the problem. It's the institutions.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And it's the same with when you get, the other academic is violence on victims who don't deserve it. You have it with any form of mass shooting, which I'll talk about Christchurch because America is a topic that's way out of my scope.
Yep.
That our government reacted the correct way. 100%. I am a person who is very well trained with firearms. Did I ever need or require an assault rifle? No. Is it fun to fire them in a controlled situation like a firing range? Yes, it is incredibly fun to play, I was going to say play with guns, but that's not the correct term. To have an afternoon out where you fire firearms. Would I ever need one at home? No. Does anyone actually need one at home? No. As my father would say, if you need to fire 2 shots, you're a shit shot. And he's been hunting with bolt action rifles since before I was born because of that exact reason. If you need to fire more than 2 shots, you're garbage. The only thing you need to fire 2 shots at is multiple victims of whatever's on the other end of your barrel.
Yeah.
And majority of the time, unfortunately, in this day and age, it's people.
Yeah.
Because with hunting licenses and, it's not like the days of old where you just walk out into the woods and there's like 1,000 deer and no government control over how many you shoot, or, buffalo, back to one of the other episodes going native we just did. There's a long time that's changed, and even New Zealand, you could go on to previously to the tragedy that happened in Christchurch. You could just go on to, I won't mention the website, but you could go onto a website and be like, here's an entire tab that is just a store for AR-15s. And none of them can be fully automatic in New Zealand because we always had a law against that. But why?
Yeah.
You don't need it. Yeah. They're garbage at hunting because the reason... I'm not going to get into. It's one of my. It's coming on my spectrum here, folks. It's one of my
special interests.
Special interests. We're not going to talk about it. We're getting off subject. But yeah, my point still stands. Like, in a long-winded way, it is the echo chambers that people fall into that are the actual issue. And when you speak out against it, to be silenced. You have hate mongering can happen in a forum that is anonymous, that can lead to some idiot going to a mosque and shooting a bunch of innocent people, going to a nightclub or a venue that is frequented by people of the not same sexuality as you, and the victims not being the same sexuality as the perpetrator, and then committing some other crime. And the same thing can happen within a church. And you have to be realised that the people in power, institutions in power, want to stay in power because that's what, that's my oldest rant of why politicians can't be trusted, because they spend years promising you something and then they're never going to fulfill that because the entire point of them is to stay in power after it.
Mm.
They will say anything. They will promise you the world to get into power, and then as soon as they're in power, all they do is try and stay there. And I'm not saying the French Revolution was the correct way of doing it, but maybe things will change if heads will literally roll.
Yeah, I just need to get the guillotine back out, eat the rich, all that. Guillotine the Catholic Church. No,
eat the rich doesn't work either.
We are not condoning violence.
No, violence is not the option. Yeah. Not the answer. Mm-hmm. It is an option, but it's not the answer. The answer is us as a people, as a singular human race, is listening to people and then having the ability to give a shit about what they say. And that is, in the modern era, very hard thing to ask.
Mm. Yeah.
Because if it doesn't affect me, why would I care? I'm pretty sure more people complained about the fact that, the last season of House of Cards was garbage, more than actually gave a shit about the fact that he was accused of abuse. Mm. And the issue is we'll never friggin' know if it's true or not.
Yep. And to bring that back to what we're here discussing, these movies bring those stories to a much bigger audience as well. Because, not everyone has read. I haven't read the article in the Boston Globe about the priests. I know about it from Irish news sources. But first of all, in both the actual true stories, the Boston Globe publishing an article and the New York Times publishing an article, those were bringing the stories to mainstream.
Yeah.
And now these films are bringing them to a much wider, much more international audience.
Yeah.
Like I said, I saw both these films in cinema. I saw Spotlight in cinema in Dublin. I saw She Said in cinema here in Wellington, New Zealand. And so, they're on the big screen internationally. Spotlight did win an Oscar, or it won 2 Oscars, but it won Best Picture.
Yeah.
And I imagine She Said will at least be nominated for Best Picture.
You'd hope so.
So, they've brought these series issues, and I mean, for She Said to do it, not to diminish Spotlight, because I think Spotlight is a fantastic film, and I think the message it brought was amazing, and I think it really gave a much wider audience and much more of an insight into what happened. But for She Said to tackle this and then put it forth to the Academy of Motion Picture, when it's about their industry, when it's about Hollywood and about producers and
there's some BDE.
Yeah, and I mean, but it has its own problems, because as you pointed out when we watched it, one of the producers is Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And you know what the problem is there?
No.
Well, there are several. First of all, Brad Pitt was dating Gwyneth Paltrow in the 90s, when Gwyneth Paltrow was assaulted and abused by Harvey Weinstein. So Brad Pitt has known about Harvey Weinstein's abuse since 1996. He then married Angelina Jolie, who at the beginning of her career was abused by Harvey Weinstein. So he knows a lot in depth about the problems with Harvey Weinstein. And yet he has worked with him on multiple occasions since then, including pursuing him directly to ask him to produce a film for him. Which is, from what I can gather, is one of the reasons that he and Angelina Jolie eventually split up, because they had a massive fight over the fact that he wanted to work with her abuser and she, was not comfortable with it at all. And he said, and he insisted on using Harvey Weinstein to produce it. And then to the point that when he and Angelina split up, he hired Weinstein's PR strategist. And she has since accused, I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be, because I believe it's still ongoing, but she has put out accusations against Brad Pitt for domestic violence and abuse of both her and their children. And knowing that he also said in an interview that he liked Weinstein despite the allegations against him, even though he was dating Gwyneth Paltrow when she was abused and he was married to Angelina Jolie, who had been abused. So he's well aware of the truth to the allegations and has known about them since the 90s. And yet in, I don't have the year, but Killing Them Softly in 2012, he insisted on working with Weinstein. So why did he produce this film?
That's an interesting question. But it's the same as like...
maybe his PR strategist told him to do it.
Yeah. You don't listen to your PR strategist. You end up on a rampage Reddit AMA issue.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah. It was like, what was it recently? Which it sucks because like one of my favourite it sucks for the victims. And the fact that people get away with it, but like The Pianist is one of my favourite war movies, and Adrian Brody plays he does such a good job in his performance.
And I love him in a whole slew of Wes Anderson films.
Yeah,
as well.
but then like he was also instrumental in a new case to try and get Roman Polanski back into being able to go to the States, because if he goes to the States he'll instantly go to jail because he's a child molester. And just like, oh no. Like, we can't like anything in this modern era because people are scumbags.
Yeah, and I mean, to some extent, as a lot of people know, any victim of abuse knows, abusers are very good at grooming the people around them to believe that they are good people, which is why you get a lot of, when someone gets called out for abuse, people will say like, oh, he's always been really nice to me, oh, he couldn't do that, he's a really good guy, blah, 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 because that's the image they've cultivated for themselves. So I can understand to some extent, that he might have had that effect, that Weinstein might have had that effect on Brad Pitt, or that, his name is blanked in my head, Polanski would have that effect on Adrian Brody. But with all the allegations that have come out, and especially in Brad Pitt's case, with knowing that his ex-girlfriend and his now ex-wife had been through that abuse, like, how could you then turn around and be like, oh, but I like him and I want to work with him? Yeah. It just, it's not a good look, is what I'll say. Yeah,
it's interesting because the thing that comes to mind now is the underlining moral issue that came with the show that you showed me, The Good Place. Where you have a
great show.
Yeah. Where you have one person being like apparently the pinnacle of like goodness and will definitely be going to heaven in this fictional universe, and it turns out no, like, because of these days our choices are so complicated. I don't support Nestle because of their human rights abuses. I've stopped supporting Sanitarium because apparently they're a charity and not a business. Do we mention Kellogg's being about, like...
Yeah, we talked about that in, I think, our It's a Wonderful Life episode.
Yeah. Kellogg's being, being a vegetarian, you being a vegan, people who eat meat, that I'm not here to tell you you're right and wrong. The grain industry kills animals as a byproduct. Like, there is nothing we can do in modern time unless we go live on, like, either another planet that is built completely by selfless people and we never make the same mistakes that we've made here, or you do your research and you cause every single trip to just buy food a 3-hour-long journey of, can I, there's apps for it these days, and good on you app designers for doing that stuff. But like E-numbers, which if you don't know are ingredients, not like, additive numbers, and you're like, oh cool, what's this E-number? Cool, now I'm going to spend 10 minutes on a website trying to find out what the hell is in this item, and it turns out it's like ground up bugs, and you're like, what?
Why is that in there?
Yeah. which is a major, shellac is a major ingredient in licorice, which is one of my favourite treats, and that's why I only support RJ's Black Knight, because
what is this natural flavouring? Oh, secretions from a beaver's ass. Okay.
Yeah, it makes delicious raspberry and strawberry flavours. That's a true story. Vanilla flavouring used to be made out of the same stuff they used to make paint thinner out of back in the 90s. The moral choices you make with your wallet are so complicated, and it's like, if I was, if I'm going to do a moral knife point here, I would not support an industry that abuses people, but then watch this movie so the message gets out. But it's also possible, a person who's accused of knowing about abuse, and it's like I was mentioned yesterday when we were at our cinema club. About the Charles Manson. I was going to say Charlie Chaplin. That's the wrong person. That's a whole different other fandom that's very awkward. Charles Manson and people not wanting to speak about that now. Yeah. Yeah. Hollywood's closet is so full of skeletons. You could open up a Halloween. A 365 day a year Halloween store, and still have spare skeletons in the background.
Yeah, and it hasn't, it hasn't been solved by the Me Too movement.
No,
by any manner of means. There's always going to be abuse, and the purpose of things like this, like the articles and the movies, is to give people a voice and to make people feel like they can speak out about it.
And the issue is that, from my point of view, because I've known it's happened, is you get people who speak out and don't get recognition the same way someone else would, like what happened to Terry Crews.
Brendan Fraser.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fucking hell. And then you get the other side of it, where you have people speak out against people, and then the accusations aren't true. And you're like, again, this is a double-edged sword. We should believe victims.
Yeah.
But if people who are scumbags, because if there's people out there committing this atrocity, these horrible things to other people, you'll know there's going to be people who are going to use it against people they don't like.
Yeah.
And it becomes an issue of, again, fake news. It's like, okay, I want to believe people who are victims of a horrendous thing to happen to them.
Yeah.
But people are going to use this to get at people.
Yep, absolutely. There will always be people who will
because human beings are genuinely shit.
Yeah, no, there will always be someone who's going to try to use any kind of system to benefit themselves. And that's sad, because what happens then is if a lot of people do that, then suddenly no one can be believed. And then you get real victims who are, being set aside because people assume,
because there was a lady,
because you don't like so-and-so.
There was a lady recently who accused, it was 10 to 15 people of sexually assaulting her. And it basically, this was over time, it wasn't in one court case. To the point where because of how quick everyone wants to jump onto it, she ruined these people's lives. And it turns out she was full of shit and is now spending, I think it was 23 years in prison because of her false accusations. Yep. It's that's fine,
Well, at least she faced consequences.
Yeah, but the issue is that the damage she's done
for actual victims.
Yeah. And they didn't actually do anything. And it's a worry.
Yep.
It's a real worry. But again, it comes down to one of the biggest powers of the institution is being able to use lawyers. And, there are things written into the law to protect victims. And the issue becomes, the fact that they are basically locked into a silence. It's the same, with the doctors. They can't say anything because unless you're their patient, because to protect people. And even if a lawyer wants to say, hey, I'm protecting the scumbag who's abused, you're going to lose your career. It's an interesting issue.
Yeah, especially when, in the case of both the Hollywood producers and the church, they have so much financial power.
Yeah.
So they can afford those lawyers and they can afford to, smear the
Drag
names of
court
people.
cases out for decades.
Yeah. And and they can afford to settle hundreds of cases out of court, Anyway, we've gotten a very long episode now. This is turning into our longest episode, but yeah.
It's definitely a discussion. You're gonna have to put so many bloody warnings.
Yeah, because I do put content warnings in our show notes, and this one's gonna have a lot.
Yeah.
But that's all right.
Box office is out of here for this time period.
I mean, I can tell you what we've got. So for Spotlight, budget was $20 million. Box office was $98.7 million. For She Said, the budget was $32 million, and the box office at the moment is only $6.4 million, which feels very low, but it is only just been released in the past week. And
it's not a Marvel movie.
Yeah, so hopefully it'll go up. I mean, performances are fantastic in both movies. You've got Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan in She Said, and apparently they've been friends in real life for the last 14 years.
Oh, that's good.
And Zoe Kazan was actually a bridesmaid at Carey Mulligan's wedding, which is cute. So nice that they got cast as people who've been working together for a long time. Whereas the other movie, you've got Stanley Tucci, Michael Keaton, Rachel McAdams, Liev Schreiber,
Mark Ruffalo.
I was like, I'm forgetting people. Yeah, there's a whole load of people.
Batman, Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever her name is in Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Liev Schreiber is what does he play in the X-Men? He's someone in the X-Men movies, isn't he? He's not Sabretooth. Is he Sabretooth? Liev Schreiber? Okay.
I can't remember.
I don't know. In terms of notes, I feel like I've covered most things. One of the things I thought was interesting was the for Spotlight, they created a set that was to look like the globe. I'm trying to figure out where I actually put the notes. It's disappeared. Oh no, okay. So they made a set for the Boston Globe offices, and when the actual reporters visited the set, they just kind of all went to their own desks and like set them up how they had been set up, because it was obviously realistic enough that they're like, oh yeah, this is my desk. Whereas She Said was shot in the real New York Times building. It's the first movie to have ever used the real New York Times offices. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know if I had much more. Most of the notes, or most of the IMDb trivia about Spotlight is about Walter Robinson, who's the guy that Michael Keaton played, and it's just about him being real freaked out by Michael Keaton's performance. It seems to be there's 5 different quotes from him. The only one I took down was, it's like watching yourself in a mirror yet having no control over the mirror image. But he also said that he felt, after watching Michael Keaton's performance, he felt sorry for every person he's ever interviewed for having to interact with him. If that's what he's like. He also was apparently really freaked out the first time he met Michael Keaton, because there's notes as well about Michael Resendez, who Mark Ruffalo plays, and he says that watching Mark Ruffalo reenact 5 months of his life was like being in a funhouse mirror.
Yeah.
But with Mark Ruffalo and Michael Resendez, he spoke to him a lot, and they asked him to read some of the lines for him, or to show him what he's like when he's angry and stuff, so he could get a real read on how to do him. Whereas Michael Keaton just thoroughly researched the guy and watched loads of videos and learned how to be him. So when he first met him, he spoke to him as himself, and the guy got real freaked out. He was like, "This is our first time meeting. How do you know this much about me?"
Yeah.
And he's doing a full impression of him. So and Michael Keaton just totally freaked out the guy that he was playing, which is kind of fun. Can you imagine the first time you meet Michael Keaton, he's just he is you?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it would work with the age gap of us, but yeah.
So that's fun. Yeah, that's about it for notes, I think. I didn't even really take, because when we saw She Said, we hadn't fully decided we were going to do an episode.
Yeah.
So I didn't take a notebook or anything to cinema. And in terms of notes I took for Spotlight, I took about 5 notes, and it was just one was a quote and the others were just similarities. And the only other thing was that I took down the number of stories they wrote. They wrote 600 stories in the case of a year.
Jesus.
About the the various cases that came up from their first one. That's a lot of articles.
Yeah.
But good on them. Fair play to the Spotlight team, and to Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor, who wrote the New York Times article and the book about it.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of those people for the hard work that they put in. Yeah, I don't know if there's much more to say. I think we've covered it. I'd say everyone watch both these movies would be my recommendation.
And I'd say if you have been a victim of some form of abuse, seek help.
Yep.
Through, I'm not going to say through the church, but through any means.
Yeah.
If it's speaking to people or, anonymously, or I'm sure there's hundreds of resources out there these days.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of helplines and things. There's a lot of websites you can go to for resources. If you've been affected by any of this, definitely talk to someone.
Yeah.
Have a voice.
Thank you for all for listening.
Do we want to talk about our social medias? Because we haven't this time. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram, @ittakes2_pod, or Facebook at @ittakes2pod. We have a Discord server. There'll be a link in the show notes and on our website and Twitter. And our website is ittakes2.co.nz.
Stay safe out there, folks.
Goodbye.